When we tease out the two options regarding the father's role in mitzvah pidyon haben, option 1, that the mitzvah from the very outset was placed upon the parent, or option 2, that mitzvah pidyon haben is technically a mitzvah that belongs to the child, but on account of a technical situation is transferred to the father, these two options come into much sharper focus when translated into the real world of halachic practice. If we are to maintain that the mitzvah is primarily the child's obligation performed by the parent, then the parent's role and consequently the right to perform this mitzvah is applicable only up until the bar mitzvah of the child. If the parent, for whatever the reason, does not fulfill this mitzvah before the child reaches the age of mitzvah obligation, then the prime obligation reverts back to the child, and he would have first rights, to the exclusion of the parent, to perform mitzvah pidyon haben. If, however, the prime obligation for this mitzvah rests upon the parent, then that mitzvah remains even after the child has reached the age of bar mitzvah. It is only in a situation where, for whatever the reason, the parent does not wish to fulfill his obligation regarding mitzvah pidyon haben, then the Torah allows for the child to fulfill this mitzvah without authorization from the parent. And it is for this reason that we have an additional pasuk, that the mitzvah pidyon haben can be fulfilled independent of the father's wishes. And herein lies the differences between the Talmud Bavli and the Talmud Yerushalmi regarding the specific pasuk that forms the basis for this aspect of mitzvah pidyon haben. Shmot 13:13 is one of the three pasukim that addresses the obligation for mitzvah pidyon haben. The pasuk contrasts the peter chamor, the firstborn of a donkey that needs to be exchanged with a lamb, to that of the bechor adam, in the words of the pasuk, v'chol bechor adam b'vanecha tifteh, that tifteh you are obligated to remove the kedusha from kol bechor adam b'vanecha. From the standpoint of critical textual analysis, an argument can be presented that the word adam in this pasuk is superfluous, in that mention is made in the pasuk of bechor b'vanecha. Obviously, we are referring to the firstborn child, and as such, the word adam is unnecessary. The text could have read v'chol bechor b'vanecha tifteh, which leads the Talmud Yerushalmi to suggest that what we have here are, in effect, two obligations. One is an obligation that the parent must redeem his child, and that in the event that the parent does not redeem the child, there's a separate obligation upon the child to fulfill this mitzvah. In other words, by linking the two obligations, that of the father and that of the child, to the single pasuk, the Talmud Yerushalmi is in effect stating that mitzvah pidyon haben is a single mitzvah, primarily directed at the child, but on account of the technical issue is to be fulfilled by the parent. However, the parent's right to fulfill this mitzvah extends up until the time of bar mitzvah. Once the child has reached bar mitzvah, the obligation returns back to the child with an accompanying loss of parental right in the fulfillment of this mitzvah. This would be the position of the Talmud Yerushalmi. We will now look at the position of the Talmud Bavli regarding mitzvah pidyon haben in the event that the father has not fulfilled the mitzvah prior to the child becoming obligated. While the Yerushalmi traces the obligation for pidyon haben for both the parent and the child to the single pasuk, thereby linking the two obligations, the Talmud Bavli, as we shall see, while in agreement with the Yerushalmi that the parental obligation is based upon Shmot 13:13, the Bavli disagrees with the Yerushalmi with respect to the child obligation, which it sources from Bamidbar 18:15, is Ach pador tifteh et bechor ha'adam. In doing so, the Bavli seems to separate the two obligations, that of the father and that of the child. In Gemara Kedushin Daf Chavtet Amud Aleph, the Gemara quotes a braita regarding the parental obligations as part of his child-raising responsibilities. The Tana Rabbanan, Ha'av Chayiv Bibeno, a father is obligated with respect to his son, La Mulo, Brit Milah, Livdoto, the Pidyon Haben, Ulalamdo Torah, arranged for the child's involvement in Torah study, Ulahasiya Isha, to become actively involved in assisting his child in finding his life partner. It is to be assumed that, where appropriate, this also applies to one's daughter. In addition, one further responsibility is Ulalamda Umanut, facilitating that the child gains financial independence, putting bread and butter on the table. Vayesh Amrim, the Braita adds, Lahashita B'mayim. He has an obligation of teaching the child to swim, as part of a responsibility for the preservation of life. The Braita adds a comment attributed to Rabbi Yehuda, the Kol she'ein malamed et beno umanut, a parent who does not take the appropriate steps leading the child to financial independence, ki'ilu malamdo listiot, is tantamount as if he led him, the child, forced the child to resort to illegal activities in order to survive. In its analysis of the Braita, the Gemara asks, Liftoto, the obligation for Pidyon Haben Minalan. What textual basis is there for the father's obligation to undertake the Pidyon Haben? And answers Dichtiv Kol Bechor Banecha Tifdeh. The pasuk referred to earlier, Shmot 13:13. V'hecha delo parkei avuha, and in a situation where the father has not fulfilled his obligation for Pidyon Haben, ihu lemifreke, what basis do we have for the obligation for the child to undertake the Pidyon Haben? Dichtiv, as the pasuk states, Pado Tifdeh, a reference to Bamidbar 18:15, where the wording is Ach Pado Tifdeh et Bechor Ha'adam. Notice that in this reference to Bamidbar 18, no mention is made of the father. We had earlier touched upon two options that allow us textually to include the child. In other words, going beyond Shmot 13:13. One is the double expression, Pado Tifdeh. Alternatively, as Rashi suggests, the vowling of the word Tifdeh can be read in the passive. Tipadeh shall be redeemed, applying a separate aspect to the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. Hence, while the Yerushalmi places both mitzvot, that of the father and that of the child, upon the single pasuk, linking the two aspects together, the context being the obligation for Pidyon Haben, according to the Bavli, the child's obligation coming from Bamidbar 18 is not directly linked to the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben, but rather comes as an extension to the mitzvah and a subcategory to the matnat kahuna, the involvement of the kohen in the entire process. And herein we have the halachic difference between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli. According to the Yerushalmi, both the parent and the child obligation emanate from the single pasuk, allowing us to suggest that the mitzvah is primarily given to the child, temporarily transferred to the parent, and hence post bar mitzvah, the parent no longer has a right to fulfill this mitzvah. Whereas according to the Bavli, the parental and child obligations are not linked. They come from two separate sources. The prime obligation belongs to the parent independent of the child. In other words, not, as the Yerushalmi maintains, an extension to the child obligation, and hence the mitzvah remains even after the child reaches the age of bar mitzvah. It's only in a situation where the parent, for whatever the reason, does not undertake the mitzvah, the Torah makes an allowance for the child to fulfill mitzvat Pidyon Haben.